Welcome to a new Bis episode, or because this is an Egyptian themed episode, I guess you could say Anubis episode. Get it? Get it? Enough puns for today. Let's move on to our Egyptian themed MOCs episode. We're going to cover MOCs that have a little bit of that Egyptian flair, whether they're inspired by ancient Egyptian gods or just take little notions from sort of the aesthetics and general kind of look of ancient Egypt. That's what we're going to look at today. So let's begin. The first MOC we've got today is by Matt Goldberg and is called Anubis. So this MOC is kind of entirely made of CCBS pieces. So if your collection kind of mainly comprises of CCBS parts, you don't really have a lot of the old typical G1 Bionicle parts, then this is the MOC for you. You could easily recreate something like this. So it seems the sort of starting point of this MOC was the actual torso design here. Here's a bit of a breakdown image of how that was made. So Matt posted this a while back, and then it seems that the MOC sort of spawned out of this funky connection and sort of interesting design. And that's certainly something that you yourself could do, is just be mucking around with pieces, just kind of playing, just sort of putting things together, and suddenly you kind of come up with something interesting, whether it's just sort of how some pieces kind of interlock or just ways that parts can connect or something. And then you kind of evolve that, see where you can take it, and then eventually it could spawn an entire MOC. So if you are, struggling to build something right now, you're not too sure about any ideas, you're not too sure where to go, just kind of muck around with pieces, and like we see with this MOC here, it could just become the stimulus you need to make the rest of another MOC, which is pretty awesome. But yeah, overall, pretty typical kind of CCBS build here, but it works really well, and there's some awesome color blocking going on throughout the whole MOC here, and a really, really beautiful custom head with this awesome sort of eye design using these claw pieces here to kind of form the general shape of the eyes there. Looks fantastic, and overall has a really nice sort of Anubis look and feel to it. It is a relatively simple construction, but it works really nicely, and it doesn't really need to be overly complicated. It still looks fantastic. So yeah, nice job, Matt. I think you've made a fantastic Anubis MOC there. Let's move on to the next MOC, which is by Mohammed Nari and is called Horus. This is, of course, based off the Egyptian god Horus, the Egyptian god of the skies, the sun, and war. One of my favorite things about this MOC is the use of some of the cloth elements that he's put in here, using this tan and dark red cloth piece here, which came in a Star Wars set, the Battle of Takodana, and then a pirate sail here. The kind of general color scheme and kind of look of that is very ancient Egypt and is very, very fitting to the aesthetic that he's very much nailing here on this MOC. So yeah, using some of those cloth pieces here is a really beautiful accent point on this MOC. Really makes the MOC pop, really makes it look really unique and different to anything else I've seen. I think that's a fantastic use of specific colors and of those specific cloth pieces too. Really, really nicely done. Overall, the kind of general color scheme and color palette of this MOC is also quite fitting to ancient Egypt as well. You've got those sort of golds, the browns, the dark tans, things like that. Very much matches the sort of buildings, the sands, all that kind of color scheme and stuff. And you typically see a lot of gold with the gods or the pharaohs and things like that. So in general, the kind of colors that have been used on here is very fitting for that aesthetic. So if you're kind of just wanting to get little notions of an ancient Egypt mythological kind of look to your MOC, kind of picking some of these colors would definitely be a good starting point. It just goes to show how effective a color scheme can be in really nailing a specific aesthetic or look. I think this is a brilliant example of that. I also think it's cool the amount of Ben 10 pieces that have been used here. So when Bionicle died, of course, there was that wave of Ben 10 construction figures, and basically the arms and the legs are primarily using a lot of the limb pieces that you got with the Humungosaur construction figure, and the torso there is also a Humungosaur piece, and the way that the shoulders have been kind of crafted here is using the kind of headpiece that came with Humungosaur as well. So quite a lot of parts that have been used on that Humungosaur set there. So really cool to see that, he sort of bought the one set and managed to use pretty much everything in that to really kind of shape and make this MOC here. Just goes to show that you can buy kind of just one set and easily make a MOC with that. Obviously, you put a few other pieces in there that you've got in your collection, but very much you can work with a more kind of limited parts range in that regard. So that's pretty cool. And also really awesome to see too, just very basic limbs with some minor additions and things added to them, but really, really serves the MOC and really looks quite nice. There's also a heck of a lot of jewelry and other gold pieces here. Kind of briefly touched on that before. Really cool weapon here, and this other sort of kind of Egyptian symbol here that he's holding here, kind of made out of yellow system pieces there. Looks fantastic, as well as sort of little gold highlights on his dress and the sort of necklace that he's got here. Really, really nice, really fitting to that kind of pharaoh god look. There's certainly a lot of kind of jewelry and kind of gold ornate details and things that you see throughout ancient history but specifically throughout ancient Egypt. And on the subject of Egyptian jewelry and things, Mr. Muhammad Mari has also made a fantastic Pharaoh's breastplate piece here. This was made for a brick badge contest that was not too long ago, I believe. It was actually this year. But I think this is a fantastic mock and a really cool way of taking the kind of ancient Egypt aesthetic and vibe and not having to make a humanoid out of it, actually focusing on other aspects of that culture and other aspects of that time, and making it something that you yourself could wear and, you know, enjoy in a different way to a specific humanoid character or non-humanoid character, but, you know, a human of some kind or a living being, maybe not even just a human, I guess. You follow what I mean. You're picking up what I'm putting down. I also think certainly in more recent years, specifically with like Ninjago sets and stuff, we've actually had a pretty massive increase in gold pieces as well as sort of jewels and other kind of treasury pieces. You know, we see a bunch of these wheel pieces here that came in Atlantis sets, and those were kind of the treasures that came in pretty much every Atlantis set. And, you know, you take a look at a fair few sets these days, and actually a lot of them can have some sort of treasure element in them, you know, whether it's the bad guys robbing the bank and you get some jewels, or whether it's just some gold bars in a castle set or something like that. You know, there's definitely a lot more gold pieces and sort of treasure-like aspects out there nowadays. And, you know, you may have a bunch of them in your collection that are just sort of sitting doing nothing. Well, maybe you could make a cool-looking kind of necklace or ornate sort of piece of some kind. And like we see on this mock here, he's done a fantastic job of doing just that. A few aspects of sort of ancient Egyptian jewelry, or even just some of their sort of ornaments and things, would often use like scarabs and things, and you sort of have that beautiful rich blue. And we kind of can see little notions of that on this mock here. We see the dark blue skull spider here, with a few little additions there, like some wings and some feet and stuff like that. And it very much kind of resembles a scarab there, which is very, very fitting to your ancient Egypt aesthetic. So really, really cool little addition there. Really great way of using that part and keeping with the aesthetic and stuff. And really, essentially, one very important thing to do if you are focusing on building a sort of ancient Egyptian mock, whether that's within that world or that mythology, or whether that's in just taking aspects of that aesthetic, definitely a good idea to just kind of Google ancient Egyptian jewelry or ancient Egyptian anything and just sort of see what stuff you can find. You know, little things like that of a scarab, or little things of the jewelry that they use, maybe the sort of line styles of some of the art that they've done, or hieroglyphics, or just symbols and things like that. There's no reason you couldn't implement some of that stuff into your mock. You know, you might have one sort of image of what ancient Egypt looks like in your head, but when you do a bit of research on it, you could see reoccurring sort of colors, themes, symbols, things like that you could start to implement in your mock that maybe you didn't realize were as common. It's always something to think about. So if you are looking for a bit of inspiration, Google is your friend. It's always a pretty good rule, you know, if ever you're feeling stuck on an artwork, whether that's your homework, your painting, your sculpture that you're making, or the Lego that you're making, pretty much if you're ever feeling stuck, you're not sure where to go next, that's your brain telling you that you just need a little bit more input. And that's essentially what BIS is as a series, right? It's, hey, what do I do for an ancient Egyptian mock? Here, let me show you a bunch of examples of what people have done with ancient Egyptian mocks. Here's input, and then your brain goes, oh, cool. I got it. I know what we can do next. Here we go. That's more or less what inspiration is. And that's it. If you ever feel uninspired, go out into the world, go do some research, just take a walk and give your brain input, and then eventually you'll get some ideas and things will start ticking and moving around, and that's it. So yeah, you ever feel stuck? Google is your homie. Give it a Google, go for a walk, look up stuff, give your brain some input. Anyway, I'm on a completely different tangent now. Really fantastic ancient Egyptian jewelry here by Mr. Muhammad. Let us now move into the next mock, which is by a one Logan W. and is called Patois, Master of Mummification. So the description here says that this Master of Mummification is directly based on the Egyptian god Anubis. So maybe not a mock that is 100% within the mythology of ancient Egypt, but obviously takes a lot of notes from that. So that's what I was talking about before, if you want to just kind of go along with that ancient Egyptian aesthetic, or take notions from some of their gods, because some of their gods are really fantastic character designs that you yourself could implement in any of the mocks that you're making. And we've already seen some of those before and seen how effectively they make really cool looking characters, and this is a great example of that. So one of my favorite things here, we saw a cloth design before on Horus, and we see another cloth design here, but this one isn't actually using official cloth pieces, it is instead using a bunch of hand connectors. And it still really effectively communicates the look of kind of cloth elements like that. The way that he's used those Borak arms there to kind of have it sort of flow around his waist and stuff like that really looked like a kind of loincloth of some kind. is really, really effective and really cool, and awesome to see how effectively that kind of cloth aesthetic is communicated through the color blocking on this mock, as well as just through the general look of it and everything, and the fact that it's very distinctly different to the other parts of the body. Really, really great way of doing that. Very different to what we've seen before, but works really, really well. So awesome design. Also really nice color scheme here. The black and Keat orange really pops and also kind of fits very well with the general look of Anubis there, who more or less is the same kind of color scheme. Also really like the design of the weapon. We were talking about, taking inspiration from ancient Egyptian sort of symbols and tools and things like that. It's very much is in line with that here and makes for a fantastic looking weapon. Using that kind of wheel piece here to form the sort of circle at the end is a nice little part use too. Very, very cool. And also too, we spoke before about scarabs and how that's sort of a kind of reoccurring motif within ancient Egyptian stuff. And we kind of take a look at the torso here, kind of using this jumper piece here, the old jumpers from Hero Factory Invasion from below. Kind of just the way that's placed on the torso and kind of the general look of that part kind of resembles a scarab to some degree. So I think that's a nice little nod too of, taking notions from ancient Egypt and applying it to this mock, and it's still being very in-universe and still looking and fitting in with the rest of the mock. I think that's a lovely little addition and a really nice use of that part as well. One thing that's cool on this mock here is the hand design too, kind of taking these lift arm pieces here and then kind of connecting in the bottom two fingers there that way, and then connecting the thumb illegally, but still very nicely, connecting that hand connector into the CCBS Hero Factory bone piece. Of course, that is, like I said, an illegal connection because that hand piece isn't really meant to go in there. There probably is a bit of stress being put onto that part, but it makes for a really nice looking, very simple hand design there. Looks very nice, very cool. So lots to love about this mock. Nice work there, Logan. Let's move on to the next mock, which is by Aeon 10121, and this mock is called Anubis Wrath. So I'm start off with the weapon on this mock. Really, really nice addition of using that Gadunka mask there. That's a very large part, can be a little bit more difficult to use if you're building on a sort of smaller scale here, but having this rather large, imposing kind of staff of some kind, it works quite nicely here. It's an interesting texture, it's an interesting look, and again, it kind of resembles a scarab to some degree, both in color scheme as well as the texture and things. Very fitting and very in line with that universe, and not that universe, that mythology and everything like that. Very, very nicely done. We also take a look at the head design here using the Makuta Pterodax mask. Actually, kind of the general shape of that very much sort of resembles a sort of Anubis-like head. Very, very cool. But also seeing those two kind of claw pieces there used as the ears, very much resembling the ears on an Anubis head like that. Really, really fitting and really cool. And also interesting to note that just the simple inclusion of those sort of earpieces like that very much makes this mock look a lot more like Anubis. It's a very simple addition, just sort of adding those few pieces there onto the mask like that. But it does so much to the mock and really helps it stay in line with the aesthetic that he's using. And that's super cool to see. Really, really subtle additions that actually do a lot for the mock. Also to the color choices on this, using that sort of black, dark blue, gold, and even that sort of glow-in-the-dark blue there, which sort of resembles a scarab to some degree. All of those colors, we've kind of seen them before in some of these other Egyptian mocks. It's very in line with the look and aesthetic that we're going for. Really, really cool. So it's interesting. We're kind of seeing a lot of repeating things here on these mocks that, if you're going for this aesthetic or this look, definitely a route to consider. Obviously, there's other pathways that you could go down, but, if you want to really fit in with that sort of line of thinking, here's the way to do so. As we've seen on multiple mocks that have had these reoccurring motifs on them. Very cool. And then finally, the final mock in this episode is by Anthony Wilson and is simply called Ra, the god of the sun. So I really like the weapon on this mock, the circular shape of the top there, using that wheel piece like that. Looks fantastic, really unique shape and weapon. I also love the idea that wheel piece is literally just connected to the sort of beam hilt part of this staff. But then he's added these Hero Factory pieces there to kind of round off the edges there, and added a few little system details there to really pretty it up, make it look a bit more ornate, a little more in line with how they would go very over the top with those sorts of features and ornate detailing on everything in Egypt. Very in line with the universe, but also really nice too that very simple connection of just shoving a wheel onto a beam looks way cooler when you sort of put all these ornate details on it and sort of rounded off the edges where the wheel meets the beam and stuff like that. It's a really, really nice look, and a great way of sort of making that look way cooler than the actual connection is, if that makes sense. So it's that, isn't it? Just finding ways that you can detail the sort of simplified areas to make them pop out, stand out more, look cooler, or sort of flow better. Really like the nice part use here of using those two claw pieces to kind of form the beak on Ra's head here. Very, very fitting, very cool looking. And I also like the little inclusion of this trans-orange orb here. Kind of just looks like some sort of, I'm not quite sure what it is, could just be sort of a representation of the sun, since he is the sun god, or just sort of some sort of object or mystical item that he's holding there that kind of, relates to his godly powers, but it's sort of obscure enough that it kind of gets your imagination thinking. It's just a fun little interesting detail, and it does a lot for the mock. I quite like it. Kind of ties in the other aspects of the mock too, like the little kind of heart light that he's got and the bit on his weapon as well. Kind of brings the rest of the mock together. It looks really nice. Also like the repeated masks here on the legs, kind of using them on the top here in gold and then the bottom here in dark blue, kind of repeating that texture there. Really helps to kind of form the general shape of the leg, but also helps to kind of just create unity throughout the mock and have everything flow together nicely. And also, too, the repeated pieces throughout this mock is a fantastic addition. Specifically looking here on the torso, repeating these Hordika chest pieces here. Kind of creates this sort of interesting armored look to him and just sort of makes everything flow together by repeating those pieces. Looks great. I love how that looks. And actually, there's a fair few different kind of system highlights and details throughout this mark, whether that's sort of the main part of the chest, the snakes on the weapon, just some of the dishes on the legs, stuff like that. That really kind of helps fill out sort of specific areas on the mock, kind of add a bit more detail, really make the mock pop in some interesting ways, kind of just, it looks fantastic. So little things like that, having a very Bionicle heavy mock, or Bionicle and CCBS heavy mock, and adding in those little system details there to kind of just round it off and pretty it up a little bit more. It's a great thing to do, and it doesn't require a huge amount of system pieces to do so and still produce a really fantastic effect. So yeah, really nice work, Anthony. Great job. And that's it for all of our Ancient Egyptian themed mocks in this episode of the Bionicle Inspiration series. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, check out the links in the description below and you can take a look at some of the other stuff that these awesome builders have made that we've seen today. They're all fantastic builders and they deserve a little bit of love, and you can check out what they've done. And also while you're there, there's also links to my social media if you're interested. And yeah, that's about it for this episode. Hopefully you enjoyed. And something I didn't mention before, I was thinking it in my head as I was talking. I was like, I'll say that at the end. I totally forgot. Anubis Wrath, this mock that we saw before by, I can't pronounce his name, but his Aion 10121. This guy. He submitted his mock very recently, actually, but it was perfectly in line with this episode that I was planning. And I reckon the way he did that submitting it was he checked out the community tab on my YouTube and saw that the next episode would be Egyptian-themed mocks, and then he submitted his Egyptian-themed mock. So by all means, check out the community tab on my YouTube and vote away for the episode that you want to see next, whatever theme that is. Because sort of for the foreseeable future, I haven't got too many pre-recorded ones left, so I'm just picking those and doing those. So if you've got a theme, suggest it, and if a mock that you've made fits in well with those themes, submit it to me right away, and it's way more likely that it's going to appear. I've already got a few more ideas of future BIS episodes up my sleeve, and I've got a whole bunch more submissions to work through, but if I've already made the commitment to do an episode and I haven't picked the mocks yet, by all means, suggest some of those mocks because you're way more likely to be put on the show a little bit quicker. Just a thought, just a suggestion. Although, that said, the next episode will actually be a fan-submitted mocks episode because I'm thinking every 10th episode I'll do one of those. So, if that happens, then the next episode after that, whatever that is. That said, the next poll will be the episode after the next. So, do pay attention to that. Same thing basically still applies. You just have to wait an extra week. But that's all good. Anyway, hopefully you enjoyed this episode of the Bionicle Inspiration series. Happy building. I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.